What Donald Trump has done to these children, and it's not just in Colorado, Governor, you're right, it is kidnapping.
It is not kidnapping, and this is a problem I have with Marianne Williamson, and I'm going to come down pretty hard on her in this video, and I'll have some nice things to say about her at the very end. I've noticed a few things when reviewing her comments from the debates. She says a lot of high-flying rhetoric and a lot of nice platitudes that sound good, and oh, we're all for love. Who wouldn't be for that? But when you drill down to what she actually means, first of all, sometimes you don't even know what she means by it. So she's not communicating in a very clear way. She's just saying some fruity language, and you're like, that sounds nice. I'm for love. I guess I'll agree with you because we're both for love. As if the other candidates aren't for love. I mean, I don't think there's a candidate in the entire race that would say I'm against love. Like, who would say that? But that's kind of irrelevant whether she's coming from a place of love or not. The only thing that matters is, will her policies help people? Will they help the world? That's all that matters. And all this fruity language that she's using, I'm going to try to dissect it and figure out what she actually means by it. I think I'll be able to sometimes, but other times I'll just have to say, I don't know what she means by that. She's not being clear. But as far as this one goes, this is the first one. It's not kidnapping. It's literally not kidnapping to detain a child when you have a parent that is held for a crime, which happens to Americans as well. When Americans commit a crime and are detained in a prison, the child does not stay with the parent. The child can't go into the adult prison. So the child has to go with another adult, another family member. But what if there isn't any family members around that can do it? Or friends? Then the child has to go to a detention center. And that happens for American kids too. It's not just these Mexican kids. So these Mexican families come across, the parent is caught and detained, and the child, they don't know anybody. So the child goes to a detention center waiting for the parent to be processed. So that's not kidnapping. That's literally not kidnapping. This is like a babysitter paid for by the government. Because you got yourself in a bad situation. If it's an American person, you weren't supposed to commit that crime. You're not supposed to be coming across the border. That's illegal. It's not kidnapping to detain a child while their parent is being prosecuted, while their parent is being processed. And it would go a lot faster if Democrats would agree to some fixes, because there's a lot of people gaming the system. Figured out all these loopholes to the asylum system. They come in and they say, I'm seeking asylum, so you can't deport me. Otherwise, they would deport them right away. They'd say, we're going to keep your family together and we're going to deport both of you right now. But they say, no, I'm claiming asylum, and then you have to process them. And the backlog is so long, you can't process them right away. It takes time. You can do one of two things. You can either release them and say, come back at this date. This is your trial date for the asylum. And then they almost never come back. So you basically have an open border situation with people falsely claiming asylum or correctly claiming asylum. But most of them are probably falsely claiming asylum, because you can't claim asylum just because you're poor. We have basically an open border situation where they come across, they're caught, they say, I'm claiming asylum, okay, you're released, come back on this day, and they don't come back. So you have a sieve of continuous immigration, and so they come across the border, claim asylum, and then they are released, and it's an effective open border situation. So Trump saw this, and they told him about this. They said, this is what's happening. They're gaming the system, and they said, well, we're going to charge everybody zero tolerance. We're not going to release them because they're just going free, and they're not coming back for the court date. So we're going to detain everybody. Obama was detaining some people, but he wasn't detaining everybody. But Trump said, I'm detaining everybody, zero tolerance, because we have to stop this situation. We have basically an open border situation with people claiming asylum. Now, I'm providing the whole context. Marianne Williamson didn't provide the context, and she might not even know the context. So he said, zero tolerance, we're prosecuting everybody, and when you do that, you have to hold the parent, and when you hold the parent, you can't hold the child with the parent in the adult prison. So you have to hold the child in a child facility. That's how the process works. It could be a lot faster if they change the asylum laws, because the people should not be applying for asylum here. If they're walking up from Central America, they should be applying at the nearest country that is safe, which is Mexico or another country. That's the rules. They should be kicked back to Mexico for processing of the asylum claims. So that's what's happening. It's not kidnapping. It's a situation we're trying to maintain the border. We're trying to get some kind of a sense of security and to stop the flow of illegal immigration, because this is a problem. We have increased crime because of illegal aliens, and it is a drain on our system. It's a giant cost to our taxpayers. We're paying a lot of money to fund these immigrants when they're in America. It's not cheap. It's hundreds of billions of dollars a year. We are already in debt. Trillions of dollars, $21 trillion. We don't have the money to fund all the world's population that is not in a very good country or as well off as we are. We don't have the money to do that. So we have to maintain our borders and we have to keep our country strong first. We can help these people, like Marianne Williamson says a little later. She talks about let's talk about how can we help these South American countries where they are. And that's a great question. If we want to help them, let's think about that. We don't have to take people into our country because it costs about 12 times more to feed and clothe and house an illegal alien in our country rather than in their home countries. So why don't we secure the border, talk about how we can help them in their own countries if they are legitimately going through a situation where people have to think about asylum. If that's legitimate, then maybe we can do some things to help, but not at the expense of our own taxpayers having to foot this bill and our own American citizens having to endure extra crimes, murder, and sexual assaults. And they don't want to talk about this in the Democratic Party, but yes, that does happen. Over 2,000 more murders a year because of illegal aliens. Over 100,000 sexual assaults because of illegal aliens. And Marianne Williamson wants to talk about all this fruity language. That's very bad for people, especially children, if they're sexually assaulted. Now, does she care about that? Does she have love for that? That's what I want to get down to.
If you forcibly take a child from their parents' arms, you are kidnapping them. And if you take a lot of children and you put them in a detainment center, thus inflicting chronic trauma upon them, that's called child abuse. This is collective child abuse. And when this is crime, both of those things are a crime. And if your government does it, that doesn't make it less of a crime. These are state-sponsored crimes.
It's literally not a crime. So this is 2, and I just started. There's a lot of clips to go through. It's literally not kidnapping. It's literally not a crime. See, she goes so fast and loose with her definitions here. And when you can't have a common language, it's hard to talk to people. And I've talked to people that agree with Marianne Williamson. And it's very hard to talk to them because they make up their own terms and they're not consistent with it either. If they say that you're doing this and you're not being loving, and then they turn around and they do the same thing back to you, and you're like, hey, you're not being loving, and they don't accept it. And it's like, you just lay down your definition of love, then you didn't live up to it, then I called you on it, then you act like it doesn't apply to you. You can't have all these fluid definitions. It's literally not kidnapping, it's literally not a crime, and it's not child abuse either. Because what would you say is child abuse if it was an American parent and they went to jail, there was no relative to take the child, and they put that child in a detention center? That's not a crime, it's not kidnapping, and it's not child abuse. You're doing the best thing you can in the situation. It's a bad situation, but that's the best thing you can do in the situation. So literally not child abuse. Yeah, maybe they do go through some trauma. Yeah, I don't think that's easy to be apart from your parent in that situation, but that's the parent's fault. The parent shouldn't have committed a crime. The parent shouldn't have crossed our border illegally. They should have filed asylum in Mexico or another Central American country, and there's reasons for that. Because we have 130,000 sexual assaults at the hands of illegal aliens. What about that trauma, Marianne Williamson? Because you want to talk about the trauma of these kids, you're not talking about the trauma of sexual assault. 130,000 women and kids, not just adults, kids being sexually assaulted. That is real trauma. That's not being away from your parents for a few weeks. That's a real trauma when you're sexually assaulted. So I want to see if you're consistent. I didn't hear you talk about that. That's what I care about. If you have love in your heart, you should care about that too.
Congressman. And what President Trump has done is not only attack these children, not only demonize these immigrants.
Illegal immigration is responsible for 130,000 sexual assaults per year and over 2,000 murders per year. Trump sees that, he cares about that. Not just that, but 100,000 overdoses a year. Most of the drugs coming from Mexico being trafficked over our southern border. Trump sees that. Trump cares about that. Trump loves people. He doesn't want Americans to suffer and families to lose their sons and daughters to drug overdoses or murder, or have their son or daughter get sexually assaulted by some adult. He sees that and he wants to stop that. And she turns around, she says he's demonizing these people. All he's doing is telling the truth. All he's doing is being responsible about the situation. It's more than she's doing here. She's just closed her eyes to everything bad in the world, every legitimate risk in the world. No, I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. And I'm just going to open my heart and all this flowery, fruity language, and it'll all go away. And those 130,000 rapes won't happen. And those 2,000 murders a year, that won't happen because I have all this fruity language. And the power of my love will overcome it. No, it won't overcome it. If you keep accepting more and more illegal immigrants, those numbers will increase every year. That's every year. That's not all-time totals. That's every year. Increasing every year. Especially the drug overdose is rapidly increasing. More than the number of people killed in auto accidents a year, more than the number of people killed by firearms a year. 100,000 people. Trump sees that and he's responsible, and she's going to demonize him. She's demonizing him. She says he's demonizing illegal aliens. He's being honest about the situation. He's saying this is what's happening. He's telling the truth in a frank manner and dealing with it responsibly. She's avoiding the truth. Now, my definition of love is you see the truth, you're honest about the truth, and you're responsible, especially when other people's welfare is on the line, especially when other people could be murdered or raped. You are honest with the truth. You have to be careful. There are legitimate risks, and we know the risks. It's not a could be or maybe. It is happening. Every day is happening. 2,000 murders a year, that's like 7 murders a day happening. 130,000 sexual assaults a year? That's like 300 sexual assaults a day. Over 10 an hour. That is happening right now.
He is attacking a basic principle of America's moral core. We open our hearts to the stranger.
Well, where is she getting this definition of what our nature is? She makes up her own definitions about kidnapping, about crime, about child abuse. She was wrong about all 3 of those. She thinks the nature of America is to, quote unquote, welcome the stranger. But I would point back to her. The citizenship process requires somebody to swear an oath to the Constitution. You have to swear, I put the Constitution above all else. And you're swearing allegiance to ideas, to the principles in the Constitution about individual liberty and freedom. And if somebody is willing to do that, then they can have a chance to be a citizen of the United States, provided they're not a criminal or other disqualifying factors. But as far as welcoming strangers indiscriminately, that is definitely not the nature of America. We definitely discriminate. And that's what the immigration process is all about. It's about screening out the people that we don't want here, the people that could be harmful to American citizens. We do not have an obligation to set ourselves on fire to keep somebody else warm, to hurt ourselves to help somebody else. And so we absolutely have a right to discriminate against people. If we think they're going to be bad for our country, if we think they're going to be good for our country, then of course, let's welcome them in. That's the same way you would do in your own household. If you think somebody is going to be bad for your household, you wouldn't let them in. If you think they're going to be good, you probably will let them in. That's just common sense. And so that, I would say, is the nature of America too. Yes, we are welcoming, but not indiscriminately and not blindly like she seems to be doing with blindfolds over her eyes, saying, oh, there's no problems, there's no risks, there's nothing negative that can happen from all these illegal immigrants. It seems like she's just closing her eyes to that. It's wishful thinking and it's irresponsible. I'm telling you, love is not irresponsible. That is fruitiness. That's not love. That's sentimentality, and people confuse that a lot of times with love. Sentimentality is all airy-fairy and fruity. That's not real love. That might be part of love sometimes. You have those nice feelings. But real love is responsible. Real love is work sometimes. And so we do not, as a country, welcome everybody in indiscriminately. And no country does that, by the way. These Democrats on stage are acting like this is normal. to just welcome people in indiscriminately. There's no country that does that. And I don't know of any country in the history of the world that has done that willingly. Maybe countries who didn't have the money to defend themselves, but no country with the resources to defend themselves has just decided we'll just welcome in anybody that wants to be here. That doesn't happen. That's not normal. And it's a giant disrespect to our country when people like Marianne Williamson and other people on the Democrat Party are saying this. You have to let them in. It doesn't matter what bad things happen. Well, they'll first be in denial about the bad things. They won't acknowledge it. They won't talk about it because they're not caring about the American people. They're not showing love for the American people. Love protects people. They have a one-sided, quote-unquote, love towards illegal immigrants. To say, American people, you have to set yourself on fire to help these illegal immigrants. And they'll say, well, no, it's a good, diversity is good. 130,000 rapes is not good. 2,000 murders a year is not good. 100,000 overdoses a year is not good. There are problems with illegal immigration. And yes, we can welcome in immigrants, but we can do it discriminately. That is love. That is a win-win. We can win as Americans. And the immigrants that have good intentions, they can win by having a better life here. It can be a win-win for everybody. And the people who have bad intentions, they won't win, but that's their own stuff to figure out. We don't want to enable them by giving them a host that they can leech off of. That's not good for them. That's not good for us. That's not good for anybody. That's foolishness. And to close your eyes to that, it's an irresponsible thinking. Irresponsibility is not part of love.
All of these issues are extremely important, but there are specifics, there are symptoms, and the underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason. I do not believe that the average American is a racist, but the average American is woefully undereducated about the history of race in the United States.
She says America is woefully uneducated. How would she know that? You know, one thing I've noticed with her or with other people like her is they have an opinion, and if you don't agree with their opinion, then you are uneducated, or you are not opening your heart, or you need to get more love in your life. It's never, oh, you have a point. Let me address your point. Let me have a real discussion with you. It's never that. It's always, there's something wrong with you because you don't agree with me, because I'm good and I'm loving, and therefore I have the right opinion, and you're disagreeing with me, so you must have a character defect. That seems to be the attitude, and it's pretty disrespectful, and it's short-sighted too, because she is not all-knowing. I'm sure that a lot of people could talk to her about race or about the history of race in America and tell her things that she didn't know beforehand. And I'm sure she could tell me things that I had never heard before, and that's fine. I'm not saying that I'm all-knowing, but I'm just saying that we can all learn from each other. So when you take this attitude of this is the right position, and this is the position of love, this is the position of an open heart, and if you don't have this same position, then you're not coming from an open heart. You're not coming from a position of love. You're setting up a kind of a abusive dynamic. You know, it would be better to have a situation of discussion, of open dialogue. If she wants to bring up her points and say, this is what I believe to be right and true and good, that's great. But I have that same right to bring it up to you. And if you're treating my opinions and thoughts as garbage just because it's different than yours and not engaging with my thoughts and opinions and points and my objections to your opinions, it's like, if I'm going to buy a car from you, I'm going to have questions about the car. And if I see red flags, I'm going to bring up those red flags to you. Because one, it's either a legitimate red flag that I need to know about before buying in, or two, there's a reasonable explanation for it. And me asking you about it will give you a chance to explain it. So I'll say, oh, okay, that isn't a defect in the car. It's just, whatever legitimate reason the person has. And so when people question her, it would be best if she would say, well, that is an interesting point, and this is why, instead of saying, you don't have an open heart, or you need to come from a place of love, or you are woefully uneducated, like she did here. That's not a legitimate response. She doesn't know that 350 million people in America are woefully uneducated, and she's educated. She's the only one, or anybody like her is the only one. That's ridiculous. Really heavy-handed. And I would say about the subject that she brought up, the people estimate it would cost $17 trillion for reparations for slavery, which is almost the entirety of our national debt. So first of all, that is a gigantic amount of money that we can't even fathom, really. And second of all, would we ever do this in any other aspect of society? If your mother stole money from my mother, would I ask you to pay me 30 years later as reparations? Would we ever agree to that as a society in our justice system? Would we ever say that? Obviously not. So why would we do that when we increase the generations 5 or 6-fold? And by the way, not all white people had slaves. Only 3% of white people had slaves. And you can say, well, there was other people supporting the infrastructure. Yes, but there was also a civil war, and many people died fighting to free slaves. So do those people pay reparations? The people whose ancestors died to free the slaves? That doesn't seem fair. And why shouldn't the people that own slaves, the 3%, why shouldn't ancestors foot the majority of the bill? And what about people who might be mixed race and they're black and white and they have ancestors that were slaves and ancestors that were slave owners? Do they give money to themselves? I mean, it gets kind of silly. And what about people that are African, but their ancestors didn't experience slavery? They immigrated to America after slavery. So you got all these questions, and how would you figure that out with 350 million people? You got to go through each person and determine, okay, you're this much white, you had this much ancestors in slavery, oh, you had somebody die in the Civil War fighting for freedom for slaves, so that's a good point, but you also had a person living in the South and they didn't oppose slavery, we think, so that's a negative. And so we're going to calculate your total. We don't do that for personal one-on-one relationships. So why would we ever do that for a large-scale situation? It just doesn't make any sense. You penalize the people who do the atrocities. I mean, we had reparations for Japanese people for World War II, but those were people who actually experienced going to the camps. So they were direct victims of it, not 6 generations down from slavery or more. That's not how you operate a justice system. And if you do start doing that, you start going down that road, what else could you consider? I mean, could Jewish people claim something? Because they've experienced racism, not as much as black people, of course, but they've experienced racism. And what about white people that were slaves? There was also white slaves. That's not talked about very much. What about them? What about their ancestors? And what about black people who own slaves? Because some black people did own slaves. What about them? Do they have to pay the reparations? So it gets so crazy when it's so far back, and there's so many details that you would have to figure out. And it's $17 trillion estimate. There's no way you could do it fairly if you even tried to do it, even if you had the money to do it. Marianne Williams closes her eyes to the problems of illegal immigration. She wants to talk about the injustices to black people, but she doesn't want to talk about the injustices to America. 130,000 assaults happening now, not happening 100 years ago, 150 years ago. She doesn't want to talk about the 2,000 murders now. She wants to talk about the injustices 170 years ago from slavery. So that makes me think like she's not really being consistent in these principles that she's saying, and it makes me doubt the places she's coming from, because people who have a true motivation for a certain thing, they will be consistent with it. If she really cares about trauma, she would care about trauma of the 130,000 rape victims a year from illegal immigrants. She would care about that. She doesn't seem to care about that. She would care about the murders and the kids that are overdosing and the families losing their kids. She would care about that, but she doesn't seem to care about that. I care about black people and I want them to do well, but I don't think it's fair to charge people that didn't have anything to do with the crime for the sins of their great-great-great-great-grandparents. And I think there's better ways to do it. You know, LBJ started the welfare system, and he did this primarily to quote-unquote help black people. But what has been the results of that? Black people's out-of-wedlock birth rate has risen dramatically. The crime rate has risen dramatically because women could depend on the government for income, so they didn't need the husbands as much. So you had out-of-wedlock births. You didn't have two-parent homes. Divorce rates skyrocketed. Single-parent families skyrocketed. When sons don't have a father in the home, they're much more likely to act out, misbehave, and commit crime and end up in jail. So you have a situation where the government gave money to black families, causing moms not to need the dads, causing the divorce rates to skyrocket, the single motherhood rates to skyrocket. That caused the sons' criminality to skyrocket. That's going to be another fatherless home. And so it's a cycle that perpetuates itself. They're much worse off in a lot of ways because of the welfare system. And she wants to give black people this giant 17 million present for something that happened to their ancestors 170 years ago. Maybe there's a better way to go about it. How about if we give school choice to black families? How about if we helped stop crime in black neighborhoods with better policing? How about if we lightened up regulations on opening a business so that black families could start a business and be self-sufficient and empower themselves? You know, these are the real problems in the black community: the crime and the lack of education, and the barriers to employment and being empowered. And we can address those, and it wouldn't cost us $17 million. It would cost us a tiny, tiny fraction. And we should be doing that anyway, whether black people experienced racism in the past or not, because it's the right thing to do. Keep protecting people's rights from being victimized by crime, which black people are the most often the victims of crime. We should work to stop that. Now, that's crime happening now, not crime happening 170 years ago. We can stop the crime now. We can stop it. We can't stop what happened in the past, but you can stop the crime today. You can stop future crimes.
Just trust us on this.
The fact that somebody has a younger body doesn't mean you don't have old ideas.
No, we need new ideas.
John Kennedy did not say, I have a plan to get a man to the moon, and so we're going to do it, and I think we can all work together, and maybe we can get a man on the moon. John Kennedy said, by the end of this decade, we are going to put a man on the moon. Because John Kennedy was back in the day when politics included the people, and included imagination, and included great dreams, and included great plans. And I have had a career not making the political plans, but I have had a career harnessing the inspiration and the motivation and the excitement of people, masses of people. When we know that when we say we are going to turn from a dirty economy to a clean economy, we're going to have a Green New Deal. We're going to create millions of jobs. We're going to do this within the next 12 years because I'm not interested in just winning the next election. We are interested in our grandchildren.
All right, we're going to sneak in a break.
This was more of the platitudes. She's saying she's selling herself up as a motivator and an inspirational person, and maybe she is good at that. I don't know. To me, what's more important than that is, what are you motivating people towards? Are you motivating people towards something positive or something negative? And you might be aiming for something positive, but will it actually reach those results? That's what I care about, the effectiveness of the policy. And she seems a little bit light on that. More focused on, this is my intentions. Well, that's great that you have good intentions, but do you have the plans to reach those intentions? And she's mentioned a few things already. And she mentioned in that response the Green New Deal, and she's for the Green New Deal. And most people don't know how expensive that would be. Reparations would be $17 million. Green New Deal over 10 years would be $51 to $92 trillion. It's really adding up, and I think it's quite irresponsible how some of these Democrat candidates are throwing around trillions of dollars like it's nothing. The U.S. economy every year makes about $21 trillion. That's the grand total of everybody's income. So if you just add $17 trillion, the reparations, plus $51 trillion over 10 years. Let's make those both over 10 years. So $51 trillion, it's probably going to be more, to be honest with you, because these things are always more than they estimate. So let's just say 70 million, the middle. So 70 plus 17 trillion, 87 trillion over 10 years. So that is basically almost half your income for those 10 years goes to the Green New Deal, goes to reparations. For the next 10 years, are you okay with almost half your income going to those two things? And by the way, that might not even help. It might not even help black people to get an infusion of money. Do you know that people that win the lottery, their lives are often ruined by it? So would that even help black people? We don't know. The Green New Deal, all the climate speculations have been wrong. So we could be spending money on something that's not even necessary, with all these climate predictions being wrong over and over and over and over. And then we're spending trillions of dollars, and it turns out, later, like in the 70s, they said, there's going to be an ice age. And then it turns out 5-10 years later, no, actually that was wrong prediction. So what if that happened again and you spend $70 trillion and it turns out climate change wasn't a thing? That wasn't as big as a concern as we thought. And we just spent $70 trillion, which is quite a lot of money. So you're spending $87 trillion over 10 years. You're spending almost half your income for the next 10 years. And that's not even mentioning all the other programs, the regular money that the government has to spend. I mean, the government's almost taking half of your income already for the upper income earners. Let's say the government takes 25% of your income now, and now they're taking 50% more or 40% more. Are you okay with paying 65% in taxes to fund the Green New Deal, to fund reparations? These taxes, because they're going to tax the rich people the most, the taxes would have to go sky high for rich people. So the rich people are like, I'm just going to go to another country where the taxes are not as high. And then businesses start moving out of America. And she's not necessarily considering the ramifications of her actions. She's just throwing around trillions of dollars like it's nothing. Like it won't have any impact on anything else to take that money from the people who earned it. Because it's not free. The taxpayer has to pay for that. She's lobbying for you and me to pay giant expenditures to fund what you think is a good idea that might actually be a bad idea, might be a waste. That's people's lives they could be doing other things with. That's people's money they could be spending in other ways, on their families, on vacations, on houses, on things for their kids, on all kinds of useful things for their life, and you're going to take that away? That seems like a giant robbery to me, and I don't think Marianne Williamson is really thinking about it in those terms, and she has all these high-flying ideas. She seems to close her mind to the negative aspects of what she's saying. She's closing her mind to the rape victims of illegal immigration. She's closing her mind to all the people who will have to pay for reparations and all the people who will have to pay for the Green New Deal.
I'm going to go down the line here, and I'm asking you, please, for 1 or 2 words only. All right? Please.
Really?
President Obama in his first year wanted to address both healthcare and climate. And he could only get one signature issue accomplished. It was, obviously, healthcare. He didn't get to do climate change. You may only get one shot, and your first issue that you're going to push, you get one shot that it may be the only thing you get passed. What is that first issue for your presidency? Ms. Williamson,
My first call is to Prime Minister of New Zealand, who said that her goal is to make New Zealand the place where it's the best place in the world for a child to grow up. And I will tell her girlfriend you are so on, because the United States of America is going to be the best place in the world for a child to grow up.
Kids to have a great place to grow up, that's great. And I understand she only had a second to say she was prioritizing something, and she's a little bit short on plans and a little bit short on dealing with the legitimate objections to her plans. She doesn't even acknowledge it. It's like it doesn't even exist. She's putting the blindfold on. She's putting the blinders on, saying this is the plan, it's going to work, and anybody who says anything different, you're just woefully uneducated, and you're not coming from a place of love, and you just need all this fruity, flowery talk, and that'll solve all the problems in the world. And it seems naive, and I'm not trying to demean her. She seems like a nice woman, and I do respect her for raising all that money for meals for homeless people, and that's great. And I don't know everything about her, so I'm not trying to slam her too hard, but I'm just saying that her way of dealing with this stuff is very shallow, from what I've seen.
What this question is, which is, you're likely going to have to reset a relationship between America and another country or entity if you become president, perhaps because of some relationship that you just mentioned about President Trump. What is the first relationship you like to reset as president? I'm going to go down the line, and I'll start with Ms. Williamson.
Well, one of my first phone calls would be to call the European leaders and say, we're back, because I totally understand how important it is that the United States be part of the Western Alliance.
I'm trying to get one or two words here.
We are still allies with everybody in Europe. We haven't lost that. So I don't know what she's talking about here.
5 seconds for your closing
I'm sorry we haven't talked more tonight about how we're going to beat Donald Trump. I have an idea about Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to be beaten just by insider politics talk. He's not going to be beaten just by somebody who has plans. He's going to be beaten by somebody who has an idea what this man has done. This man has reached into the psyche of the American people, and he has harnessed fear for political purposes. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, I want you to hear me, please. You have harnessed fear for political purposes, and only love can cast that out. So sir, I have a feeling you know what you're doing. I'm going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on that field, and sir, love will win.
It's more high-flying rhetoric, and this is what I was saying before about how people claim certain things are principles, but then when you show actually you're doing what you just said, you said he's playing on people's fear. Well, you're playing on people's fear. The Green New Deal, they're fearing climate change, right? You want to prevent moms being separated from their kids, right? Why are you playing on the fear of American people? So everybody's playing on fear. It's just when he does it, when Trump does it, you think there's something wrong. But when you do it, it's okay. See, I don't like those double standards. And when people do that, I find that very manipulative, and they might not even realize they're doing it. But everybody is playing on fear. Every politician in the race is saying, you don't want these bad outcomes. And they're pointing to bad outcomes that are happening now or could potentially happen. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That is being responsible. She's doing it too, but she's not saying that she's doing it. She's calling it being loving. Why doesn't she afford Trump the same courtesy? That he loves the American people so much he doesn't want 130,000 people to be raped, or 2,000 people to be murdered, or 100,000 families to lose their sons or daughters to drug overdoses. Why doesn't she give him the same courtesy? See, it's love when she does it, it's fear when he does it. That is totally unfair, and I don't even know if she realizes she's doing it. I think she doesn't realize that she's doing it, which makes it, I think, maybe worse, because it means she's kind of deluded in that particular way. To tell herself like she's so righteous and holy and she's above reproach and anybody who disagrees is just acting in fear. It's like, hold on a minute. You are not God. You are not some guru. I guess Oprah thinks you're a guru, but you're not a guru to me. You're a person, and you are subject to the same laws of reason and evidence and accountability that I am subject to, and Trump is subject to, and everybody is subject to. You're not some higher being. I don't know who she thinks she is, to be honest with you. And it's great, again, it's great that she raised enough money for 11 million meals for homeless people. That's awesome. That doesn't mean you're above reproach. That doesn't mean you can implement double standards on people. And you want to talk about what Trump has done? He has caused a great boom in America that's fed well over 11 million people. I'm not demeaning what you've done. You've done a great thing, providing 11 million meals. That's great. But there's exponentially more meals that were provided to Americans because of what Trump has done, because of the success that he's made on the economy, bringing back manufacturing jobs, bringing back businesses, investing in employees, and people having jobs, unemployment at 50-year lows, and black people and black unemployment at all-time lows, and women unemployment at 50-year lows, and people having jobs and people opening businesses. People's wages are going up. So all these things have dramatically helped people. So that's what Trump has done. He's opened up relations with North Korea, having the Korean War end between South and North Korea, having Kim Jong-un come to the table, avoiding a war in Syria that the media wanted him to go into. He's done a lot of great things, and he's trying to do more. He's trying to stop the situation at the border, but Democrats aren't helping him. And people like you want virtual open borders that would increase the rape victims and increase the crime victims, increase the drug overdoses. I'm not saying you mean to do that, but that's literally what would happen if you got into office. Definitely would happen. And if you think it's all worth it so that we can help illegal immigrants have a better life, then that's your opinion. That's what you think. But there is a downside to what you're saying. And I'm not saying you have bad intentions and people get offended by this stuff, but this is not the right road to go down. You're claiming you have love and he has fear, and you're trying to strong-arm people with that. Convince people with your evidence. Convince people with your superior ideas and superior plans. All I'm hearing is a lot of good intentions, a lot of flowery language, not a lot of meat on those bones. Seems pretty shallow to me.
High cost of healthcare. How would you lower the cost of prescription drugs?
Well, first of all, the government should never have made the deal with the big pharma that they couldn't negotiate. That was just part of the regular corruption by which multinational corporations have their way with us.
I said I was going to say something positive about her. She is absolutely right about this question right here. The government contracted with the pharmaceutical industry and we can't negotiate. It's so ridiculous. And we have to pay these sky high costs, and then other countries have pharmaceutical drugs for so cheap, and we're subsidizing the entire world because we're forced to pay the drug companies and they're making money, and then all the other countries in the world get it for super cheap. It's like, this is not fair. And she's right about that. So we should have never done that, and we should renegotiate.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a health care system in the United States. We have a sickness care system in the United States. We just wait till somebody gets sick, and then we talk about who's going to pay for the treatment and how they're going to be treated. What we need to talk about is why so many Americans have unnecessary chronic illnesses, so many more compared to other countries. And that gets back into not just the big pharma, not just health insurance companies. It has to do with chemical policies. It has to do with environmental policies. It has to do with food policies. It has to do with drug policies.
Thank you.
It has to do with environmental
Senator
policies.
Bennett, a question.
Yeah, I think she's right about that. I think this was her best answer, and I agree pretty much with everything she just said. So she says that we don't have a healthcare system. We have a system that treats people once they're sick, and that's true. Why don't we have a system that promotes health? Yeah, she's right. I mean, she's saying platitudes, so I don't know exactly how she would plan to implement that. But see, she got me. I just bought into her platitudes. She didn't have any plans. At least it's a specific platitude, unlike some of the other ones, like, oh, we should be love. We're gonna beat him with love. It's like, what does that even mean? But anyway, I agree with her statements on that one. That was a great answer. But overall, her answers were bad. I mean, the Green New Deal and reparations, that's just a start. She also wants Medicare for all. She also wants free college. We don't have enough money, literally, to do everything she wants to do. It's really irresponsible. It's not thinking about the taxpayer. She's not thinking about the negative ramifications of illegal immigration. So she seems to me like she has a very one-sided view of compassion towards certain groups and not compassion towards other groups. I don't really buy this compassion narrative when it's so one-sided. It's great you want to have all this flowery language, but sometimes the flowery language can just be a distraction. It can just be a defense mechanism because you don't want to recognize the realities of the situation. So instead of recognizing the hard realities of the world, the hard realities that some of the people coming across the border are rapists and some will murder people, instead of recognizing that, because that's not easy to deal with, instead of doing that, you just divert into this flowery language, and it's an escape mechanism. It's like escapism. You're escaping into this other realm, this other world that you've created that says, oh, this flowery language. And then when you come from that perspective, you have to attack anybody who doesn't agree with your perspective because they're kind of a threat. They're bringing you back into reality, and you don't want that. You want to live in your escapism. You want to live in your made-up world. And when you attack them, that's when I call you a fraud, because you said love, and then you're attacking people, and then you said compassion and all these nice things, but then when somebody disagrees with you, you don't address their disagreement. You just impugn them. They don't have an open heart. They're woefully uneducated. That's not legitimate to me. That's coming from a place of escapism and a place of fear, really, because you're fearing the real world. She's made a demon out of truth. Truth is a demon. If you talk about the truth, you are a demon and you're demonizing. She demonizes you, which is another contradiction. She's demonizing. She's doing everything she's claiming other people are doing. She's claiming other people are coming from fear. She's the one in fear because she's fearing reality. That's why she makes up this make-believe world. I'm being really hard on her, but people need to know the mentality that she's coming from. And I'm not saying this to demean her. I wish her the best. But if she's influencing people negatively towards a wrong mindset that seems right, because on the surface, it seems nice. A lot of people watched. You saw a lot of people clapping there. It seems nice. It seems like, oh, wow, that's so nice. She seems really compassionate. She seems really loving. But when you drill down deep and understand it, you realize this is just a facade. This is just a front. She's not living up to the compassion. She's only having compassion on certain people that reinforce her worldview of evil doesn't exist and people are not committing crimes and there's no dangers, because that's what she's avoiding. So it's really not about compassion. It's really about her continuing to avoid reality. That's really what it is. If it was really compassion, she would have compassion on American taxpayers. She would have compassion on American victims of crime and families that lose their kids to drug overdoses. She would have compassion on them, but she doesn't, which tells me she doesn't really have true compassion. She has a fear and an avoidance situation happening. And the compassion is just a front. It's not real compassion. This is the pathology. And it's not just her. A lot of the Democratic Party is doing this. This is a pathology. The truly compassionate thing is to look at the reality of the situation and act in the most responsible manner possible. That is love. That is compassion. And it's not always easy. It doesn't always feel good. It's not always flowery and sunshine and lollipops. But that is the most responsible thing to do. That's what a parent would do. That's what a mature adult does. She's doing all this flowery language. That's smoke and mirrors. That's a false front. That's glitter. She's deluded herself with all these double standards, and she's not facing up to it. She has these defense mechanisms that if somebody comes against her, they're not coming from love, because I'm coming from love. I have these fruity feelings, so I must be coming from love. She has these sentimentality feelings, and she guards them as if it's love. It's not love, it's sentimentality, which is self-centered based. If that's all you have is sentimentality, and you say, my feelings, these are my feelings, and I'm going to guard these feelings because I want to keep feeling good. And if somebody tells me the truth and it conflicts with these feelings, then I'm going to reject the truth. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to call them a name. They're woefully uneducated. They're not coming from love. They don't have an open heart. That's how I'm going to protect these feelings. Why do I need to protect these feelings? Because I'm being selfish and I only want to feel good. I don't want to feel bad. People telling me the truth makes me feel bad. And if they're doing that, they're hating me. That's what the Democrat Party says. She cleans it up a little bit more. She says they're woefully uneducated. They're not coming from a place of love. That's a little bit more of a sophisticated defense mechanism that she's doing, though. Saying that other people are hating by telling the truth is kind of hacky. And for smart people, they can obviously see that's false. And she can see that's false, so she cleans it up with a more sophisticated defense mechanism of they're not coming, not they're hating, but they're not coming from love, and they are in fear. She accuses Trump of being in fear. He's the one that's coming from love. When he's caring about Americans, when he's being protective of Americans, that's love, to protect people. The truth doesn't make me feel good, so I'm going to reject the truth. Thinking about all those crime victims doesn't make me feel good, so I'm going to reject that because you want to maintain that sentimentality. It's more like a sociopath that says, I just want to feel good, in a self-centered, me first, my sentimentality matters, and I'm going to call this sentimentality love because it's a fruity feeling, and you think, oh, this is nice. This is great. I'm going to maintain this quote-unquote love feeling. It's not really love. Love is responsible. Love is truthful. Love faces up to reality. Love doesn't always feel good. When you're coming from a place of love, it doesn't always put you in a feel-good situation. It doesn't always feel good to do the loving thing. Oftentimes it feels bad in a way to do the loving thing. It doesn't feel good to listen and wait and be reasonable sometimes. Because if you're in anger, especially if you've been offended, that doesn't always feel good. But it is a loving thing to do. Loving is self-sacrificing, which it doesn't feel good to self-sacrifice a lot of times. So she's not coming from a place of love, in my opinion. Based on her statements, based on so many double standards of selective compassion, of double standards that she says she's coming from love and other people are coming from fear. Based on her heavy-handedness of putting herself on this pedestal and putting everybody else who disagrees lower than her, and kind of enforcing that with this flowery language that makes people think, oh, she's so enlightened, which again goes back to her protecting her sentimental feeling in her heart and caring about your sentimental feeling at the expense of crime victims. That is self-centered in nature. That is like a sociopath. She has a pathology. I wish her the best of luck with getting help with it, and anybody like her. Because this isn't meant to be demeaning. Like, people have pain. People don't go into this type of pathology without a reason. Usually they have a pain, and the truth of the world triggers their pain, and they're not having a easy time dealing with whatever pain they're going through. So they turn to this kind of a pathology because it makes them feel good and it helps them avoid the pain. They think this is the answer, but it's really just a defense mechanism. It's really just a compensation pattern. The real thing they need to do is face whatever pain is driving them to do this, and they might not even know. That's why it's so hard to do, and that's why so many people go into pathologies like this. But what she really needs to do is figure out the pain of the past that she's avoiding with all these compensation patterns. Her and anybody like her need to face the pain of the past, their trauma from childhood, most likely. Once they do that, they won't feel the need to avoid reality so much. It'll be easier to face the realities of the world because the realities of the world won't be triggering all this past pain in their childhood and past trauma that they don't know how to deal with. And I'll probably do a video at some point on how to deal with that pain and trauma, because it's not just them. I mean, everybody has pain and trauma in their childhood that affects their behavior now and makes it harder to live in the world now, because that pain is like a tripwire in people's brain. It affects your perception in reality and affects your motivations and your behavior. And it would be much better for people to get rid of that pain, but people don't know how. And that's why I agree with her about the medical system. About that would be more like preventative care instead of caring for somebody when they're sick. More like, how can you get your mind well? Because these mentalities and these attitudes drive not only your mental state and your emotions, but actually affects your physical body as well. And it can affect your physical body in a negative way. And if you dealt with that, you'd probably be healthier in all these ways. But I'll probably do a video of that at a later time. But as far as now, I wish her the best of luck. She's probably going to drop out soon. It doesn't seem like she has the support. My concern is that she's deceiving people, and she's probably has some self-deception going on, because she seems like she's sincere and she really believes some of this stuff. But as I showed, she has some double standards and a selective compassion that are red flags to me that there's something off. There's something deeper going on that's not congruent. And I already talked about that. But anyway, thank you for listening.